Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel, or welcome to my YouTube channel. So in this video we're going to look at constraint and constraint message and then required. So to do that I'm going to add three more questions, and then we're going to work with constraint, constraint message and required. So I'm going to add two more questions, not three. So the first one would be age. I know it's a bit redundant that we've asked date of birth, but for demonstration I'm going to do that. So this would be integer. Sorry, maybe I didn't write it. So I'm going to choose from the drop down integer. So this would be age. This would be how old are you? And I'd also want to ask for the height. So that would be a decimal, the height in meters. So I'm going to write height meters. So what is your height in meters? Now I'm asking how old the respondent is. I wouldn't want the respondent to give me a negative number, right? So what I will do is I want to put a constraint. So I want the age to be greater than 0. I don't want anything below 0. So the dot essentially is saying the input, the question that I'm currently on. So it's saying age should be greater than 0. That's my constraint. And for height in meters, so I'm going to say I'm going to have the same constraint, but in this case I want to have two constraints. I want it to be a positive integer, but at the same time I don't want it to be too high. So I don't want someone writing 15 meters. That would be an error. So I want the upper limit to be 3 meters. So I'm going to write and less than 3. Now the constraint message appears if the constraint evaluates to false. So if someone inputs anything that is below 0, I want a constraint message to show. So what I want here is I want to be displayed to the user is age cannot be negative. And for the height, if someone inputs anything outside the range of 0 to 3, I want to say height must be between 0 and 3 meters. So these are my constraints and my constraint message. And for the required, what I want to do essentially required is just tells the XLS form that these questions must be answered. So without answering the question, you're not able to submit your form and your form will not validate. So in my own case, I'm going to write required for first name. So you can either use yes or true, but I usually use true because whenever I use true, it centralizes my text and makes it capital, so I use true. But you can use either, so I'm going to use both yes and true, so you see how it works. So I want someone to input their first name and their last name. They might not have a middle name, which is fine, but I want their first name and last name. And also I want let's say I want their date of birth. So if they supply me with an age, fine, but if they don't, but I'm just going to add the same thing for height. So now that I've done this, I am going to validate my form. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to come to my web browser. So I'm going to choose the file. This is it. I'm going to submit. Yeah, then I'm going to preview my form. Let me zoom this in a bit. Reset. You will observe that questions that I added required to have an asterisk next to them. So I need to fill in these questions before I'm able to submit the form. So to validate here, it's going to say form contains errors. So this is this field is required. So I need to answer. I need to give my first name. So I'm going to do that. Jakub. I'm going to give my last name. I'm going to select my date of birth, and then for my height. So with my height, I'm going to write 7 meters, and for how old I am, I'm going to write -9. So as you can see, because I imputed for the height, I imputed a number above outside the constraint, which is 0 to 3. It's showing me height must be 0, and height must be between 0 and 3 meters. So the respondent or anyone filling my form would know that this is what the error is. So it means I need to impute something between this to for the form to validate. So since this question is a decimal, I can write my actual height, which could be maybe 1.98, and it will be fine. And for age, I'm going to write any positive integer. So I'm going to say 9, for example. So we added, and then if I click on validate, it's going to validate fine. So we have 2 constraints for height. You can add the similar constraint for age depending on what you want. So if, for example, you're taking age of children within high school, or let's say secondary school or university, so maybe you would want their limit of age to be 18 to, let's say, 35. So you could have something like greater than 18 and less than, let's say, 35. Someone cannot be more than 35 years. So I'm going to add a full stop here. I'm going to save, and I'm going to validate. Now, if I try to impute an age that is below 18, let's say 7 years old, it's going to give me age cannot be negative. But as you can see, our constraint message is not conveying the right information. So we need to edit our constraint message. So here we're going to say age must be between, so since it's greater than 0, so it has to be between 19. It's greater than 18, so it's going to be between 19 and 34, for example. So it depends on your use case or how you're going to use this. So I'm going to write this as my constraint message because it reflects more of what my constraint is. So I'm going to save this again and validate. Now the user cannot impute anything below 18. So let's say 15, and it says age must be between 19 and 35. Sorry, this is how you use required, constraint, and constraint message. So with required, it just essentially saying that the question needs to be answered. With constraint, you have a limit where you want your options to be to ensure quality. And with constraint message, it's the message the user sees if the constraint evaluates to false. With the template, you can always come to the tab where it speaks to the particular attribute, and you can read more about it. So for example, here, if you come to constraint, you can see that you can apply constraint text. I'm going to do a video on how you are going to do this. This is how you use a regular expression to put a constraint on text so that you have exactly what you need and a lot more. So this is how to apply constraint message, and required to your form. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you in the next one.